Hey guys, welcome back to the Results Junkies podcast. Paul and I are sifting through all of the stuff that's out there on AI today. We got a handful of stories that we're going to try and tackle, and this may end up being a two-part episode just depending on how long-winded we get. But we got a story about Figma and a product that they have at least temporarily suspended pending the outcome of what the model is actually producing. YouTube has released a new tool that will help users request the removal of AI-generated content that they don't agree with, and an article that talks about big tech and sort of emphasizes some of these same concepts that Paul and I have been talking about in terms of how the big guys are playing this and how much they're taking over. From a little bit of housekeeping standpoint, show@resultsjunkies.com is how you can email or send us your complaints or questions. He is at Paul Singh on all those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. And though we're not sponsored, I would just say if you're watching on video, PD's Bing black cherry juice with energy and a whole lot of caffeine is how I'm getting through today. Mr. Singh, it's good to see you, and I'm just looking to see if I can see exactly how many milligrams of caffeine is in this, because I think I'm going to need every last one.
Did you just do a product placement on
I did.
on the show?
I did. I really did. And I really need it because I'm dragging. I'm definitely dragging today, man.
I'm hurting. Yeah, it's been a pretty busy week. I was talking to some friends the other day, and I was like, I know it was only like a day or two of meetings, but it felt exhausting. It just sort of felt like 7 days of work crammed into a day and a half of meetings. So I don't know, maybe something's in the water.
Yeah, and anybody that says that travel isn't tiring, I remember, I remember when I used to think that travel was fun. 120 milligrams of caffeine, by the way. We're gonna take every last milligram we can.
What's your heart rate?
As long as it doesn't explode mid-show, I think we're fine.
Oh man.
All right, so let's dig into this Figma article, and I'm gonna wireframe it up a little bit. But honestly, the article itself isn't necessarily the thing I want to spend a lot of time talking on. It's more the concepts that we're thinking about here and how things are changing very rapidly and how founders and investors should be thinking about this. So the genesis of this, Figma, which we had talked about in the show a couple of times, big acquisition target that sort of fell apart, call it a little over a year ago. They have they had a new feature. Whether it comes back or not is another question. But they had a feature called Make Design that would help in theory, what it's supposed to do is supposed to help folks come up with a design quickly that they could work on from there, sort of capture their ideas as they were coming to them. And you could use a text-based prompt to say that you wanted to build something. And in this case, it was first reported on by a tech reporter online, and then caught some more widespread information. And essentially, they were using this user interface to say that they wanted to make a weather app. And in multiple attempts, the Figma tool essentially reproduced the Apple Weather app and did an exceptional job of replicating it. And so there was this question of, what did Figma train their model on, and was this, were they stealing Apple's designs? And there's a lot of questions here. And I think, we can go a lot of different directions, but I think there's at least two main questions. One is, and some of this is what you alluded to in the pre-show, some of this is like, what's the liability for when you're training a model? And then the other thing is sort of, how far can founders take some of these new technologies without running the risk of having to unwind it later because they found out that the model that they used to help on these things was trained in a way that it shouldn't?
Yeah. Well, let's riff on this a little bit because I think there's a couple different ways to maybe unpack this, but let's maybe frame it. Like I think you sort of alluded to this. Maybe we'll frame this into a conversation that might be more useful to founders or maybe product managers as they think about this. I think first things first, if we were to rewrite this article and remove any reference to AI and instead, make this article look like it was a human doing this, that one of their employees was generating these things, we generally know how that would be handled, right? And so if you're watching YouTube, and people see you nodding, I think, but for anybody not watching, I think the point is that if an existing employee, was starting to toe the line with like plagiarism and potentially even copyright theft and that sort of thing in their day-to-day work activities, it's a warning at least, and maybe a termination at most, because not only is that not right, but that puts a liability on the company. Somebody can sue and all that. Okay, so now this is where it gets into the maybe the more uncomfortable part of the conversation, which is because AI is involved. I would think that the fact that there's not a lot of clarity right now in terms of like how liability and risk is going to be handled when a model does something like this. I think that's probably why they rolled it back. Like to maybe say this more bluntly, when they saw that this thing was doing what it's doing, you would
Right.
think that there would be a response to say, "Oh, we're updating that, our bad, whatever." In this particular case, they shut it down, or they took that product offline. They took
Right.
the entire AI maker thing offline. That to me sort of suggests that the lawyers got involved and said, "Well, hang on a second here. We not only do we have to fix this, but we need to also limit risk." So I can talk more about this here in a minute. Let me let you kind of I'd love your thoughts on it, but I've been talking about AI quite a bit, I think, over the last couple of days. So I definitely have thoughts.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think there's other pieces to this besides the risk, but I think the risk piece is really important, and I think I think it's important for maybe a less obvious reason. Like the obvious one is, companies hire lawyers to limit risk, and companies make decisions based on lawyers' recommendations all the time to abandon product lines, fire employees, move in new directions, all of those things based on the total risk that a lawyer might say is inherent in a product, if you will, or a potential effort that a company might be trying to do. It's why we write terms and conditions to limit
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah.
But 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 when you think about our startups, the companies that we've invested in for years and years and years, how many of them have lawyers? I mean, like they have external lawyers,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they call
There's probably no
they
lawyer on the leadership team yet.
exactly right, and for the most part they only call the lawyer after they can turn around behind them and see the red line. So
Right.
that's so when I think about this sort of a thing, I do see this potential from a risk standpoint that founders or people inside companies that have an entrepreneurial spirit and maybe aren't constrained by a legal department can get pretty far down a road with these tools into creating a lot of risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I I don't disagree. I was watching a recording. So a couple weeks ago now, Sam Altman from OpenAI was being interviewed by Lester Holt.
Mhm.
And it was a really interesting. It's a 30-minute, 40-minute video recording of their interview. It's on YouTube now, and the point is that it's really interesting. I think if I were to summarize how I think Sam was laying this out, is that he does seem to be alluding to a world where he thinks that AI over time could potentially replace a bunch of workers. So he alluded to it specifically when he said things like, you should be able to someday talk to the model and say, run this company well. That's essentially removing a lot of the SG&A functions, G&A functions, right? Now, long way off, right? I'm not saying that's
Yeah.
gonna like exactly gonna be how it is, but that's a long way off. But coming forward to now, where AI sort of gets dangerous is when it's left to run in an unsupervised fashion, and where mistakes can get more costly. So I think what I'm just saying poorly here is that I think that AI tools like this, when they're left open like that, the combination of liability and risks and all those things, it's just kind of tricky. Let me be more direct. The other day I was in a meeting and somebody asked me directly, what is the AI model, or what's your AI strategy? And I was, and there was a lot more context to that, but he was like, what's your AI strategy? And I said, well, frankly, it's just wait and see. And
Yeah.
you would have thought that I had like said the dumbest thing in the world, because now I'm surrounded by these people that have asked this question. They're used to like reading all these huffy puffy posts about how AI is everywhere, AI note taking, AI this, AI that. And then to hear me say, yeah, our strategy is just wait and see for the near term, it was like I was the idiot. And so so then I kind of went on, I was like, but let me explain. I said, I think longer term, I think the first logical step, or over the longer term, I think if you want me to answer that question, knowing what I know today in, the middle of 2024, I think the first time you see any sort of AI powered tool is going to be something that augments our staff. It maybe makes them more
Right.
productive, maybe saves them a little time, but ultimately the person will still have to do the work, because I need to be able to point, especially in the line of work that we're in over at Strata. I still, given the way that the risk models and the liability models work, let's just use E&O insurance as an example. The person is covered, not the tool.
Right.
And so if I go completely unsupervised and let machines do all the work, that could be a problem. So I think what I would say to this on the side of for founders listening to this is that I think if you can kind of force yourself to stop using the word, like stop describing, saying AI, like nobody says, like they don't use MySQL in the conversation anymore. It's more like, I need a database. Well, why do you need a database? Because I need to organize my information and then get access to it. The tool is sort of abstracted away, and instead it's about what's the goal. I think
Right.
in the context of founders here, I don't think you should be starting from a perspective of what is my AI strategy. That is basically going to force you to then try to find a solution to a problem that may not even exist. Conversely, I think you should look at it another way. If I were to create things, or if I wanted to create a way for more productivity, if I wanted to find more productivity across my team, what would that be? And then you back into how you get to the answer. I know I'm not articulating that well, but let me give you an example of what I mean. In our business over at Strata, it's a lot of heavy code and automation that does some magic to do a lot of processing. And generally speaking, about 80% of our claims never require human intervention. That's a pretty big, high number in our industry. That's good. But the other, let's call it 20% from time to time that come back, require a human to look at it and figure out what went wrong here. Was it a data entry error, at the point of care? Or did the API go down? Or did the rules with this insurance payer change and we need to update that? So a human has to look at that and then through their experience and their knowledge and their training, try to then figure out what that problem is. Because if the API was down, okay, just hit the button again and tell the computer to try again later.
Right.
Rules engine problem. Oh, I better put in a ticket. But hang on, before I put in the ticket, what is the change that needs to be made? Let me go call. So this is where, for example, a one problem we might want to solve, and notice I have not used the jargon yet. A problem we might want to solve here is could we maybe make a suggestion on what we think the problem could be? Hey, we think the CPT code combination is incorrect. Or, hey, we think that this looks like a data entry error, possibly, because maybe the date of birth is in the wrong format or something like that. My point is simply that I'm trying to solve for more productivity. Maybe I'm solving for more throughput on a particular job function in the company. And that's where now all of a sudden it's like, well, the old way of thinking about that would be you write a rules engine, tests, and then, okay, this failed this test, so you go look at that. But now with things like AI and these models, you could feed it a lot of this data and then let it make a decision on, hey, this looks like this problem, but that looks like that problem. So that was a long and rambly way of saying, for founders in particular, just for the sake of the thought, don't talk about the technology. Try to not talk about the technology at all and just start to think about the problem you're trying to solve. A practical one, for example, might be ad copy. So in a previous business that I was involved in, you had to create lots of different variations of visual content, and then you would use that to rotate through your pay-per-click ads. So in other words, you'd have a designer create 5 different versions of maybe a square ad, and then you would upload that into maybe Facebook ads or Google ads or whatever, and then tell the system to kind of iterate through those 5 to find the highest conversion rate.
Yeah.
Well, that required us to have a designer on staff to do that, for example. But this is where it's like, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Well, man, I wonder if I could create 50 variations of this ad and now programmatically test it and see which one drives the highest conversion rate.
Right, but to create 50 versions of it, then you're going to need to use technology, and that technology is trained on something. And this is sort of like, I mean, I know this is very, very loosely related, and maybe not even, a reasonable similarity to what you're talking about. But, I recently reached out on Twitter to ask folks, if somebody in my ecosystem knew somebody who could create great thumbnails for podcasts, because I wanted somebody to create some more creative thumbnails for my travel podcast.
Yep.
as you can imagine, a lot of people messaged me. My DMs are open on Twitter. A lot of people who I do not follow and don't follow, who didn't follow me before, all messaged me and, hey, I can do this. Like all kinds of people that listed things like graphic designer or UX UI or designer or artist or whatever in their description. And they all sent me examples of their work. And the work was so similar across the examples. So similar. And it was like, wow, I mean, like these are all being generated by, a couple of tools, maybe only one, but like very, very similar tools. And they're using elements that could be, easily defined as usable content.
Right.
But gosh, I mean, once you start to get like, as you start to move further into that, like if you say you got 50 variations of something, at some point, if that model that you're using to generate those 50 versions was trained on someone else's original work, how much does that get embedded in your process before you realize that?
Well, let me push back a little bit just for the spirit of debate here, or in the spirit of debate. Let's pretend, and this is a good example you just gave, by the way. Actually, let me start with my point and then maybe give an example if the point's not clear. Maybe what this actually means, with the example you just gave, maybe what this means is we kind of have to get used to or get comfortable to the idea that when you engage in technology, you have to be even more explicit than what we're used to. So in other words, now let's explain with an example. When you have it, let's just go back to that designer example for
right.
I think through the combination of NDAs and business experience and all that, that designer knows that they should not plagiarize or overly copy something else. They know that. Mm-hmm. So in other words, when we assign the work, because we kind of know that they shouldn't plagiarize because of life experience and all those other things, when we assign the work, we don't remind them not to do the same thing. But maybe
we do, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, let's just use the example. Like, tell me if you disagree. Like sometimes when I go and want a designer to go do something, they might say, well, show me some things you like. They're trying to figure out what I like.
Right. Yeah, no.
And so we give them examples, and then in their experience, they know not to copy the example outright, but to use that as like influence or whatever, inspiration or whatever. So maybe the solution here is that when we're talking to the machine and we're saying, give me 50 variations, maybe we also have to tack on one more sentence that says, please don't copy or reuse anything else. Did you ever see the movie Interstellar with Matt McConaughey?
If I did, I forgot it.
In this machine, I won't ruin the movie for anybody, but in general, it's about obviously interstellar travel, and they have these robots that go with them, and those robots have settings. So he would, every once in a while, he'd say, what's your honesty setting? And they'd say 100%. He'd say, bring it down to 90%, and then he'd say, okay, what's your sarcasm setting? Okay, take that up to 80. I'm making that up. But that's the level of explicitness we might need with these models, is to say, we want no more than 10% similarity with existing ad creative or something like that. Or, hey, each of those 50 versions needs to be 25% different minimum from each other or something like that. I'm totally making this up. Give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, because like I think the tough part about that too, though, is that it's going to be very hard to know what models they were trained on, and so like, and I don't want to delve deeply into the article, but Figma noted that they didn't specifically train on existing apps, and so for your comments of Interstellar, set me at a 90% honesty rating for apps that you've trained on, but then Figma also said that they used information from other models that they don't control. So now at that point, if you don't know what all of the models contain, so if you have subcontracted any of your model work,
there you go.
How do you answer that question? How do you answer the honesty question honestly? Because you don't know. Yes. Like if you built the model, you can say, I told the model not to look at Apple's weather app. If you said I'm going to buy data from someone, or I have a partnership with someone, you're now relying on third-party assurances. And this is at this point, this is really, I wouldn't say no different, but this starts to bear similarities to lots of other things that founders encounter in terms of derivative works and hiring subcontractors to create something for them that they haven't created for someone else that they freelanced for.
Right.
And there are lots of layers there. I think, like, I want to dig into this more, and so I think we're probably going to go long. But I want to ask one more question before maybe we put a timer in here and stop, and then we'll save the rest for next week. But I guess when you think about this, because I have another question about liability in terms of investors and founders, but when you think about this from a founder standpoint, and you look at what the Figma tool, let's call it, was creating, and I know this is going to sound like an overly generalized question, but like, you have an iPhone, I have an iPhone, you know how much you paid for the Apple Weather app, right? You paid nothing. Right? So
Yep.
Is the fact that Figma was producing a free app, a replication of a free app that Apple happens to use, is that a problem?
I suppose it depends on through what lens do I need to answer the question? I mean, if it's a legal lens, then I'm a little concerned. I don't like this. It just doesn't. I guess what I'm just trying to poorly articulate is that, when it comes to AI adoption, like this whole Figma article and what they did in terms of rolling back, I think it is a great example about why it's so difficult to move forward with an AI strategy as a founder right now. Like,
Yes.
I think you need to make sure you understand where the liability is. And again, more importantly, I think you need to be focused more on what you're trying to solve rather than how you're going to solve it. So it's like, if the goal is to solve for productivity, let's go down that path. Anyway, I don't know if I'm answering your question. I would just say that I think at least until there's more clarity around liability, data usage, data storage, all this stuff, then the rollout of AI, for most businesses is really more a function of like, can a particular AI powered model generate more productivity at the employee level? That's it. I don't think, unless you're specifically an AI research company, I don't think the goal is to like just yell AI over and over and hope to like find it somewhere in your business,
That doesn't work.
Yeah. Like, it's interesting. In that same Aspen Ideas Festival interview with Lester Holt, there was a different one with, Brian Chesky from Airbnb was in there. And somehow the conversation about AI came up. And as I recall, as I recall anyways, he didn't really answer the question directly, but he sort of explained this. He sort of painted this picture. He said, look, let's say you want to take your family, and I'm paraphrasing for anybody that watched it. He said something like, let's say you're going to take your family to a certain city. Well, what do you do right now? You go to Airbnb, you type in maybe the address or the zip code or the city name, and then you look at this map. And in your mind, you have this like mental model of what you want during that trip. Okay, I've got my kids with me, so maybe I want it to be walkable. Like, you have some level of stuff in your mind about what would constitute the perfect rental place for you. And
Right.
then up until now, for the most part, then how you then get closer to that final set of homes is you use the filters. You say, okay, I want it 4-bedroom, or I want it, whatever. And I think where he was sort of going with this is like, I don't think as I recall, he didn't mention the AI specifically. What he said was like, well, what if your personal assistant knows everything that you like already? In other words, it knows how you've traveled in the past, so it can maybe assume that you are traveling with your kids again on this next trip. And so it automatically filters out the, single room kind of thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, the initial filtering is already done for you based on your historical. I think it's just, that's an interesting, but I know I'm bad with my words today, but that I think is like what I'm trying to allude to, is this idea that people that keep yelling AI over and over and over are sitting there just kind of like, they're sitting there with a solution and they're trying to find a problem to attach it to. For the type of founders you and I invest in, that I bet you would agree with me on this. We probably don't invest in people that like run around yelling about the technology and try to find a solution. That is not what we do, you and I. What we do is we invest in people that have demonstrated the ability to be clear about what they're trying to solve. In other words, they're trying to solve the problem of how do I take a product from 0 to 1? How do I make it, can I make it work? And then, how big could this be? Like, they're solving those questions. They're not saying,
Right.
gosh, I really want to use MySQL. What can I use it for? And maybe that's a bias that you and I have. Maybe that's the reason why neither of us invested in blockchain either. Everybody was like, blockchain. Well, what happened with that?
Well, yeah, pin that, because I want to talk about the investing side of this, but let's pin it. Let's hold here. I think we're right, and we'll make this a 2-part episode. So let's pin it there. We'll close out for folks that are listening. Stay tuned for next week for part 2 of this. If you're watching on video, thanks for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. Give us a like or a thumbs up on whatever platform you're listening to. And stay tuned for part 2 of this discussion on AI and founders and investors.
Love it. Let's do it, man. I'll talk to you soon.